now with the Russians marching in, it's changed the calculus entirely. Tens of thousands of people have tried to flee the city. There will be many more. People are hiding out in bomb shelters. But this isn't a place, with all due respect, like Iraq or Afghanistan, that has seen conflict raging for decades. This is a relatively civilized, relatively European, I have to choose those words carefully too, city where you wouldn't expect that or hope that it's going to happen.
How's it going, everyone? Welcome to my YouTube channel. For those of you who are new here, I'm tjaespeaks. Thank you for tuning in. And to my returning viewers, welcome back and thanks for tuning in yet again. I really appreciate it. Today's topic is a serious one, so there's no need for me to recap what is currently going on in Russia and Ukraine, as it's nearly impossible to not have heard, read, or seen what is happening if you have any electronic device. I highly recommend you watch the video in the description regarding why Russia decided to invade now, so you better understand why it has gotten to this point. This video won't be about the war itself, but the narrative behind it. War is never a good thing. Let me make that very clear. War is never a good thing for anyone, anywhere. As you saw at the beginning of this video, certain media outlets are trying to make people sympathize with the Ukrainians because this is a European nation, unlike the Middle Eastern nations where we expect stuff like this to happen. Imagine that was him choosing his words carefully. Imagine, no, that was him choosing his words carefully. What would he have said if he was speaking candidly and freely? He basically said, we should care more about this situation because the people affected look like us. They're white, so they matter more. This is where the title of this video comes from.
I'm sorry, it's very emotional for me because I see European people with blue eyes and blonde hair being killed, children being killed every day with Putin's missiles.
I find it funny that news outlets want to make it seem like Europe is a peaceful continent when literally the cause of the past 2 world wars were because of madmen from Europe. Even right now, France is dropping bombs in Central Africa, but that won't get any media coverage because it's just, in quotes, black Africans being hurt and dying, so they don't nearly matter as much. I also take very much offense to the fact he said Ukrainians are civilized compared to the Middle Eastern nations. What makes him the judge of that? There are over 250 countries in the world. What you deem to be civilized living can be very different for someone who comes from the other side of the world. I am certain there are people who view the American way of living as insanity and uncivilized. The selfish nature of it all. It's all about you being happy. Screw your family and friends and commitments. Your happiness comes first. The focus on getting the bag at any means necessary and more can be deemed chaotic and uncivilized for people who come from China per se. This is why I say that if you want to see someone's true nature, see how they react in a time of crisis. Those news reporters were just showing you what they truly believe. They care more about white people than they do about anybody else. They care about their people more. Don't be fooled. It's not all lives matter. It's their lives matter. That's just the reality of the situation. People are showing their true natures right now. So my respect goes to the Ukrainian president from me. America offered him a flight out of Ukraine, like over the past 6 days when the invasion started. And he had the most badass response to them all. He said, I don't need a ride. I need ammunition. And honestly, this is where you see like true leaders. We know, unfortunately, with most of our leaders, chance given if there was conflict or if there was chaos breaking out in their countries, they would be on the first flight out that, okay, so thank you all for dying for the nation, but me, I'm out. That's just the reality with most of our presidents. So I really do hope he survives this. But his true nature is on display for everyone to see, and kudos to him. Much respect to him. If he does survive this, I can easily see him getting a Nobel Peace Prize. The sad truth, unfortunately, the sad truth is most people won't care about your problem or situation until it directly affects them. People took COVID lightly until it started directly affecting them. If there's a war happening on the other side of the world, most people won't care. That's the harsh reality. I remember watching Hotel Rwanda, a movie that came out back in 2004. Excellent movie, I highly recommend it. The movie is about Paul Rusesabagina, a hotel manager who housed over 1,000 refugees at an elite hotel during the Rwandan genocide. The one quote that stuck with me from Hotel Rwanda in particular over the past 17 plus years. Remember, I was like a kid. I was a kid when I heard this quote, but it really stuck with me because it's true now as it was back then, and it was from the beginning of time. When the UN peacekeeper told Paul the white foreigners would be evacuated and the Rwandans will be left behind basically to die, Paul couldn't understand why they couldn't save everyone, but only the foreigners. The UN peacekeeper, feeling guilty about the situation, drinking heavily, decided to tell him the harsh truth. Paul, you're black. You're not even a nigger. You're an African. The West thinks you're dirt. You have no value to them. The UN peacekeepers are not going to stay. They're not going to stop the slaughter. We all know what happened next. If Russia invaded an African country, you would hear about it maybe in passing on the news, and life would go on as normal. However, unfortunately for Putin, he chose the wrong skin tone to mess with. This is why the media is so powerful. Control the media and you control the narrative. If I were to ask each of you watching this video right now, name me your top 5 favorite movies of all time, I guarantee the majority of them are from America. Your top 5 favorite artists? Your top 5 favorite celebrities? You get the point. This is why governments fight so hard to control the narrative told to the masses. I can bet most of your social media is American owned. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, WhatsApp, and more. This is why America hates TikTok. Why do you think they have been trying to get TikTok banned in America? A Chinese company with increasing influence on what people consume? Oh no, America has to stop that. Only they can control what the world consumes. Control the media, you control the narrative, you control the world. America as a country is responsible for more deaths in the past 20 years than anyone else. But you wouldn't know that if you simply followed the media. Americans are portrayed as heroes in movies, coming to save the people. Media depicts Americans as saving the world from itself. Most of the world consumes American media, so it's no surprise that America influences a lot about how other countries think. You see Western culture all throughout nations. I can guarantee you're seeing it in your own nation right now. Wherever you're watching this from, American culture has infiltrated your society heavily. There is a great show that breaks this down called Crystal's Breaking Points. She goes into detail about how the American government manipulates people into caring about other wars, like the one in Ukraine, over others, depending on whether it fits their agenda or not. Remember, when America or any Western country invades a Middle Eastern country like Iraq, or topples a country like Libya, and literally takes out and kills their president Gaddafi on live TV, it's called liberation. But when Putin invades a fellow European country close to home and housing white people that look like them, it's called an invasion. Till next time.
It's easier to otherize people who don't look like you or have different cultural practices or traditions or religions. But melanin solidarity is not actually the real story here. Playing to a shared racial and cultural identity, it's really just a tool. It's a means to an end that the news media is using to persuade Americans that they should care more about the people in this conflict than in any number of other conflicts that they are not covering whatsoever. This is a classic case of the phenomenon Noam Chomsky and Edward Herman describe in Manufacturing Consent, how the media picks worthy and unworthy victims, choosing which stories, protests, wars, famines are worthy of coverage and worthy of displaying the humanity of the people impacted, and which should either be ignored completely or actively demonized. And the deciding factor here is not actually race or culture or which continent the events happen to be unfolding on. The deciding factor is which narratives are most convenient for the U.S. government. Just ask yourself this question. Why was it that for decades of the Afghan war, the Afghan civilians killed by the U.S. state were considered unworthy victims? Then, for a brief period during our withdrawal from Afghanistan, suddenly Afghan civilians were worthy victims. and then the news media cared deeply about the fate of the women and girls who would live under Taliban rule. Then, just as suddenly, now that there is a mass famine caused by our own cruel theft of the Afghan government funds, Afghan civilians are once again unworthy victims. The ethnicity, cultural practices, and level of development of the country did not change. What changed was which narrative was convenient for our state. In fact, within the very same country, at the very same time, some victims were deemed worthy and covered as such by the media, while others were not. So victims of American drone strikes, unworthy. The Afghan girls' robotics team, worthy. All because of what the U.S. state wanted highlighted and what they wanted suppressed. It's disgraceful how the corporate news media is happy to manipulate Americans' most noble humanitarian impulses and channel them in directions that are convenient for U.S. power. And you can see this dynamic playing out right now all over the world. In our own country, within liberal media, COVID victims have frequently been given worthy treatment, while victims of drug overdoses have been given unworthy treatment. Looking around the world, Cuban protesters and Hong Kong protesters were given worthy treatment since they were opposing governments that our elites don't like. Chilean protesters and Palestinian protesters were given the unworthy treatment because the U.S. state did not care for their causes. Perhaps the most glaring discrepancy right now is between the way that the Ukrainian war is being covered and the way that the Saudi war in Yemen is being ignored. In Yemen, the U.S. has been backing our ally, Saudi Arabia, in a proxy war that has left the Yemeni population starving and completely desperate. In fact, Yemen is currently considered to be the world's worst humanitarian crisis, with millions of children in danger of starving to death. But since the U.S. is complicit in causing this particular war and its attendant mass suffering, you don't hear a whole lot about it. On the contrary, for all the flaws of the media's coverage of the Ukraine conflict, and there are many, they have gone out of their way to treat the people suffering there with humanity. I've watched beautiful videos and read heart-wrenching stories about refugees grabbing what they can and fleeing by the hundreds of thousands, about families hunkered down in parking garages, terrified for their lives and the lives of their children, about young men suddenly thrust in the middle of a war with a hastily issued government weapon and zero training. The play to tribalism. These blonde-haired people are just like you. They watch Netflix. That is a technique used in the manipulation, an effective manipulation because, yes, of very real problems of racism and tribalism, but it's not actually the root cause of that manipulation. The reason they want you to see these victims as the fully worthy human beings that they are is because they're opposing one of our most significant global adversaries. Now, some make the opposite mistake of thinking that since the Ukrainian suffering is convenient for the U.S. state, that we should not care about it whatsoever. So let me be totally clear. What's being done to Ukraine by Russia is horrible, and it is heartbreaking, and it deserves to be covered with humanity. I don't want the coverage of Ukraine to have less care and empathy. I want all wars to be given this same treatment. This is also not a call to stop covering the conflict. I believe the stakes for the world of what happens in Ukraine, as we've been laying out here today, are very, very high. We are witnessing a global great power realignment in real time, which will shape our world for decades to come. We are also watching in real time as the worst voices in American politics try to draw us into a war with a nuclear power. Those are serious, consequential topics with global implications, and they deserve thorough consideration. But when the media tries to convince you of the righteousness of a particular cause because of the humanitarian considerations, just remember all of the millions of humanitarian considerations that they care absolutely nothing about.